Hey, Lisa. Recording. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so
Hi,
much for
Jackie.
joining us. It's today we're talking about your book, Aggression and Play Therapy, and it is fantastic. We focused on it for our book club, which just started in the Play Therapy Community Facebook group, and I
Awesome.
know a lot of people's reading it. Thanks
hmm
for putting all that good work out there.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Oh, I like when I read the book, I expected it to be because it's based on neurobiology and or neuroscience and looking at the brain piece. I expected it to be maybe a little bit dry, and it
hmm
wasn't. It's like a page turner to where
Yeah.
like hungry for the information, but it's a super easy read too.
Well, that was actually one of the intentions in writing it because so many of um, the books that have a lot of the neuroscience in them, they get really left brain, which
Yeah.
of course you're talking about neuroscience.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about play therapists live in the world of the right brain,
Yes.
not the left brain. And there's a difference between understanding a neuroscience concept and then figuring out what's it actually look like in the playroom, and how do you actually take that concept and actually bring it to life in the playroom. And it
Mhm.
was really important for me to have a book that had a lot of stories in it and had a lot of and written in a way where hopefully this is what came across, where the readers felt like, oh, I'm there. Like
Mhm.
I'm there, I'm feeling it in my body too. I'm right there with you, just so that they could have a felt sense experience of what I was trying to talk about. So hopefully that came across, but that was my intention, was to actually make it a book for play therapists, which is the right brain world, not the left brain world.
Absolutely. And that did like right out the gate, you start off with the story of the little boy with the sword, and
Yeah,
you're like down on the floor. I
totally.
literally felt it in my body.
Exactly.
And you're like
Exactly.
in this situation by yourself. And I mean, it happens to all of us at
Yeah,
some point or another, and it's a little bit scary. And then you're thinking, what if someone gets hurt? And it's
absolutely.
overwhelming. I love how you normalize it.
Well, that was the story that obviously sent me on this whole journey,
Mhm.
because when I first started to work with children, this was back in 2002, 2003 is when I first started. My caseload was just trauma, 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 like many play therapists, and which meant there was a lot of aggression and meant there was a lot of intensity.
Mhm.
And when I went and started doing my research on, okay, how do I work with this? There wasn't anything out there. People weren't talking about it. People talked about trauma. People
Mhm.
talked about how to work with trauma, but nobody was talking about, yeah, but what about this? What's happening in my body? Like,
Yeah.
what do I do with this?
Mhm.
And, and what do I do so that my own nervous system doesn't get fried in this process? Because I just kept finding more and more play therapists were getting burned out, were getting hurt. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, wait a second, this is not why we all went to graduate school. Like this is,
Mhm.
but this is such an everyday experience for so many play therapists. And so that was really a huge part of why I wanted to write the book, was just to be such a voice of normalization, and then to offer everyone a pause and a deep breath,
Yeah.
and just some insight into, maybe there's some usefulness in the activation, and maybe we can use it in a way that's actually really helpful for the kids and helpful for our own nervous system. So hopefully that came across in the book, but that was my intention.
Yeah, and that's such an incredible concept, and it's so like in the moment so overwhelming. Like the instinct is just to probably do what the kid gets a lot of is just shut him down,
Totally.
and it makes it worse. Like I think it was chapter 2 or 3 you were talking about the very thing that we're trying to help with. If we suppress it, we're actually making it worse outside of the playroom.
Exactly. That phrase, whatever we suppress, we eventually express.
Yes.
Yes.
Man, yeah, I wrote that in my notes. That's incredible. That's so true, but I don't think that it's common sense. I think that in the moment when we're in the intense moments, it's hard when we're dysregulated ourselves. So, kind of allowing ourselves to be whatever comes up and being authentic, you
Yeah,
can really, share that energy and, like you said, be the external regulator for the child.
totally. Exactly. Yeah.
Which that concept, can you talk about that a little bit more? I
Yeah.
love reading about that.
Excuse me.
I've, since I've been reading this, I've been putting it into action with my clients, but that's something I think is taken, at least for me anyway, a little bit of practice. It doesn't seem to come
Yeah.
as natural.
Yeah. Well, at least for me in my graduate training, I was taught more how to do something. That's not to say that my also wasn't educated around the importance of presence and being with my client, but there sure wasn't a whole lot of discussion about how to really facilitate my client's dysregulation. In fact, I don't think that language it came up in graduate school.
Yeah.
And maybe that's more common language now in graduate school, but it definitely wasn't at my time in graduate school.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about something like aggression, which is such a primitive response in the body, and it's such a primitive emotion, and it's so deeply connected with the perceptions of threats and challenges and all of that.
It's
Well,
natural, right?
it's natural, and we're talking about really low center brain function. We're not talking about high functioning parts of the brain. We're talking about low instinct, reptilian, reactionary responses.
That
And
happens quickly.
totally, right? And so the idea of this external regulator for me just went back to, okay, what do I know
Mm,
about this part of the brain? And
mm,
this part of the brain is what's active for babies. That's the part of the brain that's online when a baby's born.
yeah,
And babies don't know how to manage it.
yeah. They
So
don't know.
why would I expect an 8-year-old who's having a baby moment know how to manage it?
Yeah.
Why would I have that expectation? And so it's like, what does that part of the brain need? That part of the brain needs an external regulator,
Mhm,
literally needs somebody to modulate the
mm,
intensity that's happening inside the system to help organize what's going on, because that's the part of the system in the moment that isn't able to self-govern. So
mm,
it literally needs that help. And with a baby, we pick them up and we actually manually, in many ways, become the external regulator. And so, okay, how do we do that with a baby in a really big body? And
yeah,
how do we do that just through, like, even like right now, if there's activation and we go, right? And we just like take a deep breath. Like, I just became an external regulator in that moment. And I just think it's such a useful lens for us as play therapists to recognize that yes, we're helping the child through the play. And yes, we're helping them develop insight and emotional intelligence and understanding about the events and everything that's gone in their lives. And
mhm,
yes, we're doing that. But we're also doing a whole other thing too,
yeah,
which is we're also working with their brain and we're working with their nervous system states.
mm,
And when that becomes conscious, well, my gosh, now we can work on them simultaneously. Like I can help repattern something in you
uh-huh,
while we work on your perception of how hard that was. Oh my gosh. Now
mhm,
we get to do bottom up and top down, but it requires, I have to be willing to understand my role as the external regulator through
mm,
our co regulation. I have to understand what's going on there and I have to understand that lens. Now,
mm.
I will also say, I'd love to say that I was the one that coined the term, but I did not. Allan Schor is the one that talks a lot about this idea of the external regulator and the therapist taking on that role. So I'd
What's
love to say I
his
created that,
name?
but
Did
I
you
didn't
say
create that.
you said Allan Schor?
Yeah, Dr. Allan Schor.
Ah, I just heard his name through like some preverbal in utero stuff. I heard
Yeah,
somebody refer to him. He's a
yeah,
pretty good resource. I don't know much about him, but it was
yeah.
his work is, I guess, highly regarded.
Well, so I laugh. So when I do my presentations, I'll say, "Okay, who's heard of Allan Schor?" And like 5 people raise their hand, and then I'll go, "Who's heard of Dan Segal?" Right, and
Yeah.
everybody puts their hands up. And I laugh because Dan Siegel and Allan Schor were the ones that created the field together.
Oh.
So they're the ones that both really set the stage for the field of
Mhm.
interpersonal neurobiology and started the journal for the interpersonal neurobiology journal and started the Norton interpersonal neurobiology books. But because Allan Schor's books are so left brain,
Yeah.
they're so technical, they're so big.
Uh-huh.
Um, he's he's not as approachable as Dan is.
Mhm, mhm.
Dan's sort of like gotten the spotlight,
Yeah.
but Allan Schor's work is just as valuable as Dan Siegel's work. So I really I really try to encourage people, gosh, even if it's just a page at a time,
Mhm.
digest in small bites. The wisdom that Allan Schor has is really, it's some pretty
Yeah.
amazing stuff. Yeah,
So, Dan Siegel and Alan Shore together, they had that notion of like, let's look at the brain and work with the brain, and that's where you're really going to get that change.
totally, totally.
Dr.
Yeah.
Siegel, you know what I love about his work? The
Mm.
acronyms are
Oh
amazing.
yeah, totally.
Yeah, the faces and
He's
all
the
that.
king of acronyms.
Mhm.
Yeah,
He's so
absolutely.
good. I saw him in at a conference. It was
Mm,
for couples counseling, and
mhm.
he does this, which makes me think of exactly, some of the stuff in your book. You're talking about the internal. You talk about the regulation as like a continuum.
Yeah.
He does this activity where everybody does like a body scan and just noticing what they're feeling in their body,
Mm.
and then in a really loud, harsh way, he'll say the word no
Uh-huh.
repetitively,
Yeah.
and then he has you do a body scan and check in with your body. And I've been doing that when I do speaking engagements now.
Mhm.
And it's so powerful for people
Yeah,
just to experience
yeah,
how that just dysregulation of others, that sharing of the energy affects the child or any other person.
totally. Absolutely. Yeah, and begin to even become aware of our own activation, right, in our own nervous system states.
Yeah, you talk about that in the book like pretty frequently, which I
Yeah.
think being aware of ourselves. And let's see, I wrote down in my notes, like I talk about like how to keep ourselves well. I love you that you use that metaphor of put on our own oxygen mask before we put on the oxygen mask of others, like doing
Yeah,
yoga and mindfulness, and
yeah,
just really checking in that we're well, because it can come across, I guess, the opposite. If we're
totally.
all sharing it together.
Jackie, it's a weird thing that I find where like when we talk about like working with parents,
Mhm.
step one that we know with working with parents is we teach the parent how to connect with themselves first. It's
Mhm.
like it's like parenting 101, right? It's like,
Mhm.
we teach parents if your child is like having a hard time, right? Rather than rushing in there, like check yourself first, right? Check
Mhm.
yourself first. Take
Yeah.
a deep breath. Get present with yourself first
Yeah.
before you go in and you start working with your child.
Mhm.
And we teach this. We talk to parents about this. I
Mhm.
don't know why it hasn't been translated fully into the play therapy realm yet. This
Mm.
idea of, wait a second, it's not a different process. If
Yeah.
you've got a child in the playroom that is whatever, maybe highly anxious or overwhelmed or raging or whatever it is,
Uh,
the brain says make it stop,
yeah.
which is the rush in and do something.
Mhm.
But if we just overlay what we instinctually know as
Mhm.
parents, it's put your mask on first.
Yeah.
Take your own, like, take inventory here first.
Yeah. Just come to center before you
Come
go
to
in
center
there.
for regulate yourself first,
Mhm.
right? Activate your ventral state, which is the language that we talk about in the book, right?
Mhm.
Activate your own regulatory force and then approach the child,
Yeah.
right? Then, because then you actually have something to offer the child.
Mhm.
Otherwise, there's nothing to offer the child other than like, hi, would you like some of my
Yeah.
dysregulation?
Which would escalate the situation
Which just
to enforcement.
it just escalates it.
Well, let me give you some of my upset so that we can both be upset a little bit more
Exactly,
together. That's such a
exactly.
good point. I'm thinking like as far as practical application, it'd be a good idea to, in between sessions, like carve out 15 minutes and do like
Totally,
a mindfulness activity. Or
totally,
I'd never considered that, but some sessions can be so
totally,
intense, and then you rush and trying to put the toys back after the client
totally,
freaks out of the room, and then
totally,
the next person comes in, and you're like just trying to breathe while you're
totally.
connecting with them.
I encourage therapists. A lot of times, therapists, their only little moment for themselves is the quick little bathroom break, right in between,
Mhm.
where they're running to the
And
bathroom
half
really
a
quick
sandwich.
and have the sandwich while they're doing it. But it's little things like as you're walking to the bathroom, even if you're walking quickly, just mindfully walk quickly to the bathroom,
Mm,
or
love that.
butterfly hugs down the hallway as you
Mhm.
are walking to the bathroom,
Mhm.
or like I'm gonna stand up, like one of these where you're walking down the hallway, right? And you got you're
Crossing
doing like
the midline.
those, crossing the midline, and it takes just a couple minutes
Mhm.
while you're sitting there going to the bathroom.
Yeah. Holding
Deep
it.
breaths, but
Uh-huh.
anytime we bring in mindfulness, we're activating our regulatory system.
Mhm.
And gosh, even a couple minutes of just mindful something in between sessions, even if all you have is a minute, is so huge for the nervous system.
Mhm.
It's
And
really
it's great for us as therapists, but especially look at the work that we're doing, we're going to have more like effectiveness in our work. Our kids are going to heal quicker and reprocess through this stuff quicker because we're going to be able to help them regulate as an external regulator.
absolutely,
Since I've
absolutely,
been reading your book, I like when I talk to the parents and stuff,
yeah,
I use some of the terminology.
that's right.
And I'm like, wow, this is exciting
Yeah,
because it's stuff that that helps, but as you're describing it, then they can, like you said, we teach them, go
yeah,
ahead and calm yourself down before you go tend to your child.
exactly.
But this puts some meaning behind it, a lot of meaning behind it of
Yeah,
why that actually works and why it helps. So I
yeah.
think it helps us like not only working with the kid and keeping ourselves clear from burnout, but also helping the parents really buy into it.
I think so. Yeah,
It's good
awesome.
stuff.
Yeah,
You talked about like I think it was chapter 4 or 5. They kind of all meshed together
yeah,
after I read it a while. But the polyvagal theory, and you
yeah.
use the parasympathetic. Talk a little bit about that terminology because I know sometimes
People get confused.
yeah, kind of sounds jargony, but it's important stuff, and we have that right brain. But if we could truly understand that piece, I think that's where it starts to click.
Totally. Um, yes, I'll do that, and then I'll emphasize, I think, one of the key points of the book too. So we have two branches of our nervous system.
Mhm.
We have our autonomic nervous system. We have our sympathetic branch, which revs us up, and we have our parasympathetic, which slows us down.
Mhm.
And for a long time, we just thought that the parasympathetic slowdown was just in a defensive response when we had a perception of a threat. And then Stephen Porges comes along and says, no, 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 no. There's actually two aspects of the parasympathetic branch. You'll
Mhm.
slow down for two reasons.
Mhm.
One, yes, you'll slow down if you have a perception of a threat or challenge. And
Mhm.
in that response, you're slowing down to withdraw, to go
Mhm.
into protective pattern, right? To go into a collapse response. So
Yeah,
right, there's that protective stance.
keep yourself safe.
Um, but you'll also activate your parasympathetic branch. And by the way, that's called your dorsal. You're activating your dorsal parasympathetic,
Okay.
the dorsal vagal nerve of your parasympathetic branch. Blah, 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 blah,
Mhm.
blah, right? All those big technical words, but
Yeah.
the dorsal activation.
What I'll do, I'll put a couple of images that in the thread in the group below this video so people
Oh,
can
great.
actually see
See what
a
that is.
graphic of it.
Beautiful. But then you also have your ventral vagus nerve as part of your parasympathetic branch. So we're talking about dorsal and ventral. And your ventral response is the piece that Stephen Porges really shed light on, which is, wait a second, this is the reason why you'll slow down, that actually activates your social engagement system. And it activates when you have a neuroception of safety. So
Mhm.
let me say that all in one more time again, okay?
Okay.
You have your sympathetic activation. You are perceiving a threat or a challenge. This is the one where you're going to go into a fight or flight response.
Yeah.
Um, you also have a perception of a threat or challenge. You can also activate your dorsal parasympathetic response, which is where you'll withdraw, shut down, and collapse.
Mhm. Like 3.
Yep.
Mhm.
Or you have a neuroception of safety. You're
Mhm.
not perceiving a threat or challenge. Your parasympathetic system gets activated. Your ventral response comes online. Your system slows down, but it
Mhm.
slows down so that you can relax and you can open and you can engage and you can actually connect. A nuance of the brain to understand and the nervous system for people to understand is that we actually function under guilty until proven innocent.
Mhm.
So it's a weird thing to think that regulated is not actually sort of um, the set point in the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Set point in the nervous system is actually on alert
Mm-hmm. Or defensive, that
or
maybe.
defensive.
Yeah.
So almost like you're wired for your car to be in drive.
Oh,
That's right, versus your car to be stopped.
but that's like our default.
It's your default. And
Mm-hmm.
so something has to come in and say, hey, you don't have to drive the car right now.
Mm,
So something has to come in and actually shut that off. So
yeah.
some people also refer to this as the ventral brake,
Okay.
because when your ventral system is activated, it actually shuts down or
Mm-hmm.
pauses, slows down, if you will, all the sympathetic activation,
Mm-hmm.
um, and allows, again, for the system to relax and open and engage.
So the
So,
people get softened during those moments. Just.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the part for me that is so key and probably one of the biggest takeaways from the book is that when we think about being in a nervous system state,
Mm-hmm.
what we don't always understand is that you can actually be ventrally activated and dysregulated at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, I can be sympathetically activated, so I can be in a fight or flight response, and simultaneously activate my ventral state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what that means is that, and let me go a little deeper. When I activate my ventral state of my nervous system, I'm activating my prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
I have access to regulation. I am having access to mindfulness. In synergetic play therapy, we call it a moment when you are connected, you're attached to yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're present with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting concept to wrap our minds around, to recognize that you can be regulated and dysregulated simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about how to work with intensity or how to work with challenging or big emotional states, what we're talking about is how does the therapist cultivate the capacity
Yeah.
to be regulated in the dysregulation? The
Mm-hmm.
language I use in the book is 1 foot in and 1 foot out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how can I feel the dysregulation, which I'm going to feel, and simultaneously know that I'm safe?
Yeah.
Simultaneously know, you know what? My body thinks it's a real shark coming at me,
Mm-hmm.
but I know it's a puppet.
Like dual awareness.
It's the dual awareness. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't talk about the dual awareness very much in the play therapy context. And it is so key because to me, it is the thing that differentiates someone going into burnout
Yeah.
and someone being able to maintain presence in intensity. Because the moment that I lose my own regulatory capacity, my own ventral activation,
Mm-hmm.
I'm done for.
Yeah.
I now think it's happening to me. I take the play personally. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I'm actually under attack.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm not actually safe. I feel like I'm in danger. And because I'm a human being, my system's naturally going to do what my system would naturally do under those circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But to cultivate the ability to be in it and not in it,
Yeah.
to feel it and have a regulatory force or regulation happening simultaneously
Mm-hmm.
is like a game changer. And it's the thing that allows us to be the external regulator. Not to be swept up in the intensity.
Yeah. To feel like anger towards the people or feeling like, hey, I don't want to come to work tomorrow, or
Right?
I want to call the next client and say, I feel sick. I got to go home.
Yeah.
Those feelings can really creep up on you.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing how you kind of you mentioned that dual awareness. So what I'm thinking about is that story of like the little boy that was talking about the ghost, and then you described yourself as like feeling really, you describing, oh, I feel scary, and where are they, and then he had that dual awareness, like, oh, it's just make believe or play. I forget how you worded it, but he was able to connect with that. And I wonder if that's what you're describing as like he's dysregulated, but he's also like in his, I can't even remember how you described it, but he had that both pieces, the dual awareness going on at the same time. So he got it. Whereas if you tried to rationalize with him, you're just going to get resistance and it's going to feel worse.
It's a magical thing for a child to observe a therapist tracking themselves.
Oh,
It's magical
yeah.
because a child, it's a skill. We have to learn how to track. We have to learn. It's one thing to say be mindful. Well, what does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that mean?
Yeah.
And for a child to actually witness a therapist in a moment of mindfulness,
Mhm.
active mindfulness,
Yeah.
not just sitting there quietly, but active mindfulness, where a therapist is one of my, I don't believe I talked about this in the book. Maybe I did. Did I bring Carl Rogers into the book? I don't believe I brought Carl Rogers into the book. But anyway, one of my favorite Carl Rogers quotes, he talks about the therapist, and the language he uses is the therapist is actively being the thoughts, right?
Mhm.
Actively being the thoughts, being the sensations, being the emotions, which means the therapist is fully embodied in the experience. And it's such a, for the child to watch the therapist being fully mindfully present, embodied in it. They're literally watching regulation in the midst of dysregulation. And
Mm.
the amount that a child is able to learn from that is just huge because a child then learns, oh, I don't have to lose it when I feel that way. Oh,
Mhm.
you mean I can take a deep breath when I feel scared?
Mhm.
Oh, you mean I can actually have like a witness part of myself online while all this intensity is happening in my body?
Yeah.
Wow, because I've never seen that before because I've only seen people just fly off the handle and lose it. You're actually showing me that you can be angry and hold it.
Mhm. And that's what we want for our
Oh
kids.
my
That's why
gosh,
they're coming to us.
right?
That makes me think of like Dan Siegel's like wheel of awareness, like on
Yes,
the edge of the wheel and then the hub.
it
Oh,
is.
it all goes back full circle.
It
Oh,
is.
that's such good stuff.
Yeah,
Just to kind of go back to the original story of the little boy with the sword, and
yeah.
you were actually on the floor with tears in your eyes.
Mm,
In those moments, I've had those moments,
mhm,
and it's like, what am I going to do? You have this kid on your back or sand in your face or something like that.
yeah,
And then he was able to truly connect. You said it shifted your work
yeah,
like forever. Like that relationship with that child and the healing path with that child was forever
yeah,
changed after that.
yeah.
That's some powerful stuff. That's like connecting, like you said with Carl Rogers, you're not having to come up with any brilliant wisdom. You're truly just connecting with the
Yeah.
child.
He just wanted me to get it and
Mm,
not get it. He wanted me to get it. And he was doing everything he could to help me feel the level of fear that was part of his daily life.
which is expression.
Yeah, and I wasn't letting myself go there.
Mhm.
I was pretending, I was having the sword fight, I was playing, I was just, you know, um, yeah, and I was taught in my original play therapy training, I was taught if you're given a role, you just sort of go with it, right? You go with the role, which
Mhm.
isn't quite authenticity.
Yeah.
That's a little bit removed from authenticity.
Mhm.
And what he kept doing was he kept turning up the intensity and turning up the intensity because I wasn't naming it. I wasn't fully getting the level that he wanted me to get it at. And when bless his heart, he just got me in a position where I got authentic.
Yeah.
He knew I got it. And the moment he knew that I got it, it was like, I don't need to play like that anymore.
Yeah.
I feel hurt. I feel so seen by you. I don't need to, I don't need to keep amping it. And that was the thing that allowed the play to shift. Not to avoidance. We actually went deeper into the process. We
Mm.
went deeper into the fear, but it wasn't in a way where I had to be the one that had to experience it. And we were able to name, explore the emotion at just a much, much deeper level than we were ever able to get to just because I wasn't allowing myself to really fully show up. That was just that was a big lesson for me.
Yeah.
That was
I felt it when I read that, and that's what you start off with.
huge.
That's the most brilliant way, I think, to start off your book. I was like, "Oh my god," and you're, like, being real. You're, like, owning that tears were in your eyes, and you
Totally.
wanna present as, we have this all together, like, the kids come
Yeah,
to this
exactly.
magical experience, and sometimes it looks like your hair's all over the place, you're crying or you're down on the floor,
And they're
so
going, "Why?" I mean, I didn't put
yeah.
this in the book, but after I took him back to class, because I was in a school that was a little kid that I pulled out of kindergarten, and we were in the counseling office. And when I took him back to class, I got on the phone with my supervisor, and
Yeah.
I was in tears. And I remember saying to my supervisor, "Please remind me why I became a play therapist."
Yeah, just being real.
It was one of those, like, moments where I was like, "Okay, I do wanna do this, right? Okay, I think I wanna yes, yes, I wanna help children. Yes," But at the same time, it was
It's
I gotta
intense.
find another way. This
Yeah.
is like therapists don't need to be going down for the count to help kids.
Yeah, I think though by that experience you've helped just countless others. It's incredible. That is one, and I know I only have like a few more minutes, but that's one piece I think that I really got out of the book as important too is that don't do it alone. Like seek
Yeah,
supervision
yeah,
and meet with colleagues and kind
yeah,
of bounce ideas, express your stuff so that you can stay well yourself during it.
totally. I find that particularly when we start talking about the really intense stuff and the
Mhm.
stuff that doesn't go so well in the playroom,
Yeah.
that we have a lot of shame about it,
Hmm.
and we don't wanna talk, we don't really tell our colleagues, like, "Hey, guess what?" Because we're so afraid that the colleague's gonna go, "Oh my gosh, you're a bad clinician," or
Yeah.
"I wouldn't refer to
Get
you,"
something
or
wrong. Yeah.
"Gosh, you don't know how to handle yourself," or whatever, and, I think that there's a real need for us play therapists just to go, "Can we just be real? Can we
Yeah.
just all be real about what actually happens in the playroom when the door's closed?
Mhm.
Can we just be real about it?
Yeah.
Can we actually just honestly talk about how sometimes it's just like really messy and it's hard and there's totally emotional flooding, not just the kid, but the therapist. And yes, it happens. And how do we work with it? And how do we just get honest and real about it?
Mhm.
Um, because otherwise, the shame just spins inside of us too. And then we start to question ourselves and we start to question our own ability. And that that doesn't help in the long run with us when we're trying to be helpful with kiddos.
I think that too, and you talked a lot about burnout, but also thinking about the feeling of inadequacy. At the end of the day, if you don't share those stories and they're not normalized, or you're not able to express them, you're doing all of this difficult work and feeling like you're not making an impact when you really are, and
Yeah,
it can lead to like that imposter feeling, like who am I to help when this really goes on, but really that's all part of the process, and it's a beautiful part. It's hard work, but
totally.
it's beautiful, meaningful work too.
Yeah, great.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You
Thanks,
are
Jackie.
amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so grateful that you've chosen the book as part of the book study, and there's discussion that's happening. As we're talking about, like, create discussion, right? Let's all get honest and real. So, thank you for being so supportive of the intention of the book.
Oh, it's
It's it's really
definitely an honor.
cool. Yeah.
Ah, it's
So
great. It's changed my work, and if I got this out of it, and I'm implementing it, and who knows how that's going to have ripple effect over generations. Imagine the magnitude of your work, like just for years and years to come. You're
thanks,
definitely
Jackie.
a game
Yeah.
changer. What do they call it? Change agent. Always.
Change agents. Yes. Well, please give all of your students a hug on my behalf, and because we all need hugs in the playroom too. So
Oh, marshmallow. All
hugging,
right,
hugging,
Lisa,
hugging,
you take
hugging.
care. I'll catch you
Yeah.
later. Bye bye.
All right. Thanks, Jackie. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye bye.